Good wishes to all of you. Medieval India, Chapter 3 South India, the Chola Empire, 900 to 1200. Powerful kingdoms had risen in South India during the 6th and 8th centuries. The most important amongst them were the Pallavas and the Pandyas who dominated modern Tamil Nadu, the Cheras of modern Kerala, and the Chalukyas who dominated the Maharashtra area or the Deccan. It was the Chalukyan king Pulakeshin II who has defeated Harsha and not allowed him to expand his kingdom towards the Deccan. Some of these kingdoms, such as the Pallava and Pandya, had strong navies. They also played an important role in strengthening economic, religious, and cultural relations with the countries of Southeast Asia and with China. Their native enabled them to invade and rule some parts of Sri Lanka for some time. The Chola Empire, which arose in the 9th century, brought under its control a large part of the peninsula. The Cholas developed a powerful navy which enabled them to conquer Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Its impact was felt even by the countries of Southeast Asia. The Chola Empire may be said to mark a climax in South Indian history. The rise of the Chola Empire. The founder of the Chola Empire was Vijayalaya, who was at first a feudatory of the Pallavas. He captured Tanjore in Anno Domini 850, and by the end of the 9th century, the Cholas had defeated both the Pallavas of Kanchi, Todai Mandalam, and weakened the Pandyas, bringing the southern Tamil country under their control. But the Cholas were hard put to defend their position against the Rashtrakutas. As we have noted in a previous chapter, Krishna III defeated the Chola king and annexed the northern part of the Chola Empire. This was a serious setback to the Cholas, but they rapidly recovered, particularly after the death of Krishna III in 1965 and the downfall of the Rashtrakuta Empire. Age of Rajaraja and Rajendra I. The greatest Chola rulers were Rajaraja 985 to 1014 and his son Rajendra I 1014 to 1044. Rajaraja destroyed the Chera Navi at Trivandrum and attacked Quilon. He then conquered Madurai and captured the Pandyan king. He also invaded Sri Lanka and annexed its northern part to his empire. These moves were partly motivated by his desire to bring the trade with the Southeast Asian countries under his control. The Coromandel coast and Malabar were the centers for India's trade with the countries of Southeast Asia. One of his naval exploits was the conquest of the Maldives. Rajaraja annexed the northwestern part of the Ganga kingdom in Karnataka and overran Vangi. Rajendra had been appointed the heir apparent in his father's lifetime and had considerable experience in administration and warfare before his accession to the throne. He carried forward the annexionist policy of Rajaraja by completely overrunning the Pandya and Chera countries and including them in his empire. The conquest of Sri Lanka was also completed with the crown and royal insignia of the king and the queen of Sri Lanka being captured in a battle. Sri Lanka would be unable to free herself from Chola control for another 50 years. Rajaraja and Rajendra I marked their victories by erecting a number of Shiva and Vishnu temples at various places. The most famous of these was the Brideshwara temple at Tanjore, which was completed in 1010. The Chola rulers adopted the practice of having inscriptions written on the walls of these temples, giving a historical narrative of their victories. That is why we know a great deal more about the Cholas than their predecessors. One of the most remarkable exploits in the region of Rajendra I was a march across Kalinga to Bengal in which the Chola armies crossed the river Ganga and defeated two local kings. This expansion, which was led by a Chola general, took place in 1022 and followed in reverse the same route which the great conqueror Samudragupta had followed. To commemorate this occasion, Rajendra I assumed the title of Gangaikonda Chola, the Chola who conquered the Ganga. He built a new capital near the mouth of the Kaveri river and called it Gangaikonda Cholapuram, the city of the Chola who conquered the Ganga. An even more remarkable exploit in the time of Rajendra I were the naval expeditions against the revived Sri Vijaya Empire. The Sri Vijaya Empire, which had been revived in the 10th century, extended over the Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, Java, and the neighboring islands and controlled the overseas trade route to China. The rulers of the Sailendra dynasty of the Sri Vijaya kingdom were Buddhist and had cordial relations with the Cholas. The Sailendra ruler had built a Buddhist monastery at Nagapattinam, and at his instance, Rajendra I had endowed a village for its upkeep. The cause of the breach between the two apparently was the Chola eagerness to remove obstacles to Indian traders and to expand trade with China. The expeditions led to the conquest of Kadaram or Kedha had and a number of other places in the Malay Peninsula and Sumatra. The Chola Navy was the strongest in the area, and for some time the Bay of Bengal was converted into a Chola lake. The Chola rulers also sent a number of embassies to China. These were partly diplomatic and partly commercial. Chola embassies reached China in 1016 and 1033. A Chola embassy of 70 merchants reached China in 1077 and according to a Chinese account received 81,800 strings of copper cash, that is more than 4 lakhs of rupees, in return for the articles of tribute comprising glassware, camphor, brocades, rhinoceros horns, ivory, etc. Tributes was the word used by the Chinese for all articles brought for trade. The Chola rulers fought constantly with the Chalukyas who had succeeded the Rashtrakutas. These are called the later Chalukyas and their capital was at Kalyani. The Cholas and the later Chalukyas clashed for the overlordship of Vengi, Rayalaseema, and Tungabhadra Doab and the Ganga ruled country in northwest Karnataka. Neither side was able to gain a decisive victory in this context and ultimately it exhausted both the kingdoms. It also appears that the wars were becoming harsher during this time. The Chola rulers sacked and plundered Chalukyan cities including Kalyani and massacred the people including Brahmanas and children. They adopted a similar policy in the Pandya country, settling military colonies to override the population. They destroyed Anuradhapura, the ancient capital of the rulers of Sri Lanka, and treated their king and queen harshly. These are blots in the history of the Chola Empire. However, once they had conquered a country, the Cholas tried to set up a sound system of administration in it. One of the remarkable features of the Chola administration was their encouragement to local self government in the villages all over their empire. The Chola Empire contributed to flourish during the 12th century, but it declined during the early part of the 13th century. The later Chalukyan Empire in the Maharashtra area had also come to an end during the 12th century. The place of the Cholas was taken by the Pandyas and the Hoysalas in south, and the later Chalukyas were replaced by the Yadavas and the Kakatiyas. All these states extended patronage to arts and architecture. Unfortunately, they weakened themselves by continually fighting against each other, sacking the towns, and not even sparing the temples. Ultimately, they were destroyed by the sultans of Delhi at the beginning of the 14th century. Chola government, local self government. The king was the most important person in the Chola administration. All authority rested in his hands, but he had a council of ministers to advise him. The kings often went on tours in order to oversee the administration. The Cholas maintained a large army consisting of elephants, cavalry, and infantry, which were called the three limbs of the army. The infantry was generally armed with the spears. Most of the kings had bodyguards who were sworn to defend them even at the cost of their lives. The one-time traveler Marco Polo, who visited Kerala in the 13th century, say that all the soldiers who were bodyguards burned themselves in the funeral pyre of the monarch when he died, a statement which may well be an exaggeration. The Cholas also had a strong navy, as we have seen, which dominated the Malabar and Coromandel coast and for some time the entire Bay of Bengal. The Chola state included an area of central control and loosely administered areas under different types of local control. The state was interspersed with the hill people and tribals. The basic unit of administration was the Nadu, which consisting of a numbers of villages with close kinship ties and other close associations. The number of Nadu increased as fresh lands were brought under cultivation by means of irrigation work such as ponds, wells, etc., and by converting hill or tribal people into agriculturists. Grants to Brahmanas and temples increased, both of which helped in expanding cultivation. In the Chola kingdom, Nadus were grouped into Valanadus. The Chola state was divided into four mandalams or provinces. Sometimes princes of the royal family were appointed governors of provinces. Officials were generally paid by giving them assignments of sorry, revenue bearing lands. The Chola rulers built a network of royal roads which were useful for traders as well as for the movement of the army. Trade and commerce flourished in the Chola Empire, and there were some gigantic guilds which traveled with Java and Sumatra. The Cholas also paid attention to irrigation. The river Kaveri and other rivers were useful for the purpose. Many tanks for irrigation were built. Some of the Chola rulers carried out an elaborate survey of land in order to fix the government's share of the land revenue. Modern assessors calculate the tax to be one third of the produce. In addition to land tax, the Chola rulers drew their income from tolls on trade, taxes on professions, and also from the plunder of the neighboring territories. The Chola rulers were wealthy and could afford to buy a number of towns and magnificent monuments, including temples. We have already referred to local self government in the villages in some areas in the Rashtrakuta Empire. We know more about village government in the Chola Empire from a number of inscriptions we hear of two assemblies called the Ur and the Sabha or Mahasabha. The Ur was a general assembly of the village. However, we know more about the working of the Mahasabha. This was a gathering of the adult men in the Brahman villages, which were called Agraharams. These were villages with Brahman settlements in which most of the land was rent free. These villages enjoyed a large measure of autonomy. The affairs of the village were managed by an executive committee to which educated persons owning property were elected either by drawing lots of by rotation. These numbers had to retire every 3 years. There were other committees to help in the assessment and collection of land revenue for maintenance of law and order, justice, etc. One of the important committees was the Tank Committee, which looked after the distribution of water to the fields. The Mahasabha could distribute new lands and exercise ownership rights over them. It could also raise loans for the village and levy taxes. The self government enjoyed by these Chola villages was a very fine system. To some extent, the system worked in the other villages as well. However, the growth of feudalism discussed in an earlier chapter restricted their autonomy. Cultural life. The Chola ruler saw the further growth and expansion of the Bhakti movement, which we have discussed separately. The movement was closely linked to temples. The extent and resources of the Chola Empire enabled the rulers to build great capitals such as Tanjore, Gangaikonda Cholapuram, Kanchi, etc. The rulers maintained large households and large palaces with banquet halls, spacious gardens, and terraces. Thus, we learn of seven or five storied houses for their chiefs. Unfortunately, none of the places of the period have survived. The Chola capital, Gangaikonda Cholapuram, is now just a small village near Tanjore. However, descriptions of the magnificent places of the rulers and their ministers, and of the equally magnificent houses in which the wealthy merchants lived, are to be found in the literature of the period. Temple architecture in the south attained its climax under the Cholas. The style of architecture which came into vogue during this period is called Dravida. Because it was confined largely to South India, the main feature of this style was the building of many stores above the Garbhagriha, the innermost chamber where the chief deity resides. The number of stores varied from 5 to 7, and they had a typical style which came to be called the Vimana, a pillared hall called Mandapa with elaborately carved pillars and a flat roof was generally placed in front of the sanctum. It acted as an audience hall and was a place for various other activities such as ceremonial dances performed by the Devadasis, the women dedicated to the service of the gods. Sometimes a passage ran around the sanctum so that the devotees could go around it. Images of many other gods could be put in this passage. This entire structure was enclosed in a courtyard surrounded by high walls, which were pirated by lofty gates called gopurams. In course of time, the vimanas rose higher and higher. The number of courtyards were increased to two or three, and the gopurams also became more and more elaborate. Thus, the temple became a miniature city or a palace with living rooms for priests and many others being provided in it. The temple generally enjoyed a revenue free grants of lands for their expenses. They also received grants and rich donations from the wealthy merchants. Some of the temples became so rich that they entered business, lent money, and took part in business enterprises. They also spent money on improving cultivation, digging tanks, wells, etc., and providing irrigation channels. An early example of the Dravida style of temple architecture is the 8th century temple of Kailasnath at Kanchipuram. One of the finest and most elaborate examples of the style is, however, provided by the Brihadishwara temple at Tanjore built by Rajaraja I. This is also called the Rajaraja temple because the Cholas were in the habit of installing images of kings and queens in the courtyards of the temples. The temple at Gangaikonda Cholapuram, though in a dilapidated condition, is another fine example of temple architecture under the Cholas. A large number of temples were also built at other places in South India. However, it may be well to remember that the proceeds for some of these activities were obtained from the plunder of the population of neighboring areas by the Chola rulers. After the fall of the Cholas, temple building activity continued under the Chalukyas of Kalyani and the Hoysalas. The district of Dharwad and the Hoysala capital, Halibut, had a large number of temples. The most magnificent of these in the Hoysalswara temple. It is the best example of what is called the Chalukyan style. Apart from the images of gods and their attendants, both men and women, Yaksha and Yakshini, the temples contain finely sculptured panels which show a busy panorama of life, including dance, music, and scenes of war and love. This life was closely integrated with religion for the common man. The temples were not merely a place for worship but the hub of social and cultural life as well. The art of sculpture attained in a high standard in South India during this period. One example of this was the giant statue of Gomateshwara at Shravanbelgola. Another aspect was image making, which reached its zenith in the dancing figure of the Shiva called Nataraja. The Nataraja figures of this period, particularly those in bronze, are considered masterpieces. Many fine examples of these are to be found in museums in India and abroad. The rulers of the various dynasties also patronized arts and letters during this period. While Sanskrit was regarded as the language of high culture, and a number of kings as well as scholars and court poets wrote in it. A remarkable feature of the period was the growth of literature in the local languages of India. A number of popular saints called Nainmars and Alvars, who were devotees of Shiva and Vishnu respectively, flourished in the Tamil kingdoms between the 6th and the 9th centuries. They composed their works in Tamil. The writings of the Saivite saints, which were collected into 11 volumes under the name Tirumurai in the early part of the 12th century, are considered sacred and are looked upon as the fifth Veda. The age of Kamban, who is placed in the second half of the 11th and the early part of the 12th century, is regarded as a golden age in Tamil literature. Kamban's Ramayana is considered a classic in Tamil literature. Kamban is believed to have lived at the court of a Chola king. Many others too took their themes from the Ramayana and Mahabharata, thus bringing these classics nearer to the people. Although younger than Tamil, Kannada also became a literary language during this period. The Rashtrakuta, the Chalukya, and the Hoysala rulers patronized Kannada as well as Telugu. The Rashtrakuta king Amog Varsha wrote a book on poetics in Kannada. Many Jain scholars also contributed to the growth of Kannada. Pampa, Ponna, and Ranna are regarded as the three gems of Kannada poetry. Although they were influenced by Jainism, they also wrote on themes taken from the Ramayana and Mahabharata. Nannai, who lived at the court of the Chalukyan king, began the Telugu version of the Mahabharata. The work begun by him was completed in the 13th century by Tikkanna, like the Tamil Ramayana. The Telugu Mahabharata is a classic which inspired many subsequent writers. Many folk or popular themes are also to be found in these literatures. Popular themes which were not derived from Sanskrit and which reflect popular sentiments and emotions are called Desi or rural in Telugu. We can thus see that the period from the 8th to the 12th century was not only remarkable for the growth of regional kingdoms and regional integration, but was also a period of cultural growth and the development of trade and commerce and agriculture in South India. Merchants and artisans increased their strength with the developments of foreign trade under the Cholas. Thank you.